Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm Stefan, and in this video I want to talk about the differences between the American piano method and the European piano method, and in general the difference between teaching piano across the two sides of the ocean. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already done so, and if you like what you see, give this video a thumbs up. I would also like to thank my patrons for supporting this channel. If you'd like to join them, there's going to be links for that below. Before I start talking about the subject, I want to say a few things up front. First of all, the title is the vaguest it can be, and it's not factually correct, but I had to give the video a title. There's no such thing as American piano method, and there's no such thing as European piano methods. So everybody who learns piano is going to learn piano in a different way. Every student has a different path, and every single piano teacher is going to teach slightly differently. There's no standardized way of teaching piano, and because it's such a subjective thing, music, artistry and expression, obviously there's going to be far more differences in it than teaching maths, for example. But when I say American piano method or American piano teaching style, we're going to basically look at certain patterns that are more obvious in the United States as opposed to Europe. So I want you to take everything I say with a pinch of salt and think of this video more of a free discussion or thinking out loud as opposed to a research. I don't want you to go straight into the comments and say, that's not how I'm being taught and I'm in America. I'm not saying that everyone who is in America is going to follow a certain pattern and everyone who is in Europe is going to follow a certain pattern. And I wanted to say this right at the start because I know that this video is going to have a lot of stereotypes and things that might not necessarily be true anymore, and because we live in a globalized world, everything is kind of melting into one. First of all, when we talk about Europe, we can't talk about Europe as one method because Europe is so diverse. There's so many cultures, so many nations, and each of them had their own ways of doing things. And, you know, music education in Southern Europe, in Eastern Europe, Northern Europe, Western Europe is going to be very different, and it's not quite so uniform as in the United States, which is one country, even though it's many states, and I'm sure there are lots of variations as well, but Europe is going to be more varied. I'm also going to touch slightly on the Asian method, although I don't have too much experience with that, but I did hear a lot about it and had some indirect experience. So everything I say in this video is based either on my personal experience, on certain research articles I read, and mostly on people that I have met throughout my life who trained either in Asia, America, Europe, and students that I have taught from different sides of the world. Piano really became popular in the late 18th century, and back then it was called the pianoforte. It was a very different instrument. It had a much lighter key action, it was smaller, it was lighter, and it was less loud. You couldn't put a pianoforte into a gigantic concert hall and expect that instrument to fill the entire room. In Europe, music already had a very long history. There were high standards of playing music at that time, and musicians were very highly trained in the sense that if you were a pianist, you didn't just know piano. Chances are you were playing a lot more instruments, and also you had a much wider knowledge of music, of harmony, of style, of music history, and lots of other things that you needed to know as a musician, whilst nowadays we're a little bit more specialized in what we do. So when pianoforte became very popular, there was such a huge demand for playing piano that there were simply not enough resources. You couldn't have so many teachers, and there were no books really that you could use for piano. So that was the time when they started coming up with the first method books, which are like, you know, Czerny's. He wrote thousands and thousands of exercises and educational works, and then later on, you know, Bertini, Gurlitt, and the big ones afterwards, Liszt and Chopin. The first method books, if you look at Czerny, and his book was conceived as a piano method book, is basically a collection of sheet music. It doesn't have much instruction. and it relies 100% on a good teacher who is sitting beside you, and it's taking very, very big steps in the first few lessons. So you don't start like with Faber's Piano Adventures. You don't have 3 books without any notation like the prep series, and then it takes 5 books before you get to like grade 2 level. So the leaps were very quick, and obviously everybody who did piano was very committed to it because not everyone had the chance and pianos were expensive. Now, as time passed on in the 19th century, piano started to be very widespread in America as well. The situation was very different, and this is where the root of the difference between the 2 ways of teaching piano is, because in America there were very few concert halls and opera houses, mainly in the big cities, but America is a huge country and people did enjoy music everywhere, even in the rural areas and in the south, and they needed some kind of skill that could be very quickly learned. They wanted to play these tunes that they know. They weren't necessarily looking for piano education that allows them to play Mozart sonatas. They wanted to play tuneful things very quickly that didn't take a huge amount of time to learn and to master. If you look at the early piano methods that were published in America, they start with lots of spiritual songs. And the other thing that you can see is that American method books put a huge emphasis on chords. They learn chords very early on, and they try to play melody and chords because that's the easiest way to create the sense of a song that people can sing along to, that people can enjoy, because they sound very easy on the ears and they don't require so much training that you would need, for example, for a Bach invention or a 4-part fugue. So the main reason for this separation at the very start was that the demand for music was very different in America than it was in Europe. In Europe, people expected very high standards, they had a huge history of very high quality music, and they always wanted to be better and better, and that's why you had people like Chopin and Liszt who were pushing the limits of how difficult things you can play and how fast you can play, whilst in America it was more about having a little bit more fun. Now obviously I'm not saying that they didn't have great musicians, but the emphasis was on a different thing. This is very obvious in the early piano methods. Now, if we go on into the 20th century, in Europe, there was such a thing as a conservatory, which was not the university, but students went to music schools before university, and these were either 6 years or 8 years, sometimes even 10 years, very popular in the post-communist countries and also very popular in Southern Europe. And in these schools, kids learned piano in a very disciplined manner, and they also learned all the other subjects that come with piano, like harmony, style, different instruments, music theory, music history, and so on. Whilst in the UK, for example, the vast majority of the people study music through private lessons. There are music schools, but I would say that most people who take ABRSM exams, for example, are doing this through private lessons. So there's a huge difference between how people learn music. Now, if we have a look at the method books of the 20th century that were popular in Europe, one of the most popular ones in Europe was the Bartók's First Term, which is for complete beginners, and I think the book has 2 volumes and they are not very long, and they basically teach you all the basics that you need to learn proper repertoire. But even when you start playing from that method book, you're also going to start learning Bach and other pieces. Bartók's books went at a much steeper learning curve than the American method books, and they incorporated a lot of classical skills that you need for more difficult pieces. If we look at some other British, for example, method books, they have usually 2, at most 3 series. One of the most popular method books in Britain is Me and My Piano, which has 2 volumes, volume 1 and volume 2, and after that you're expected to play repertoire. Now, if you look at the most popular American method books, which are Alfred's and Faber's and Bastian, they have so many books. Some of them have like 7 or 8 levels, and each level has 4 or 5 core books plus like 5 or 6 supplementary books. And even before level 1, you have sometimes 3, 4 or 5 preparatory books for very small children. You can imagine that obviously all of this is condensed into 1 or 2 volumes in Europe, and after that you're expected to play proper repertoire. So there's a huge difference here of what you need to learn in Europe as a beginner pianist and what you need to learn in the United States. Now, in these American books, you have obviously proper repertoire as well. You have Burgmüller, you have Czerny pieces in it, you have Bach pieces, but most of the content in these books is original content by the creators of the series, like Nancy Faber and so on, and spirituals and easy adaptations of more advanced pieces. So there are very few actual original pieces in these method books, whilst in Europe, there's a lot more emphasis put on original pieces and learning about style, learning about character very early on, so you understand the music, and there's a huge emphasis on technique, on getting things right at the start and not just thinking of a piece as fun, but getting it actually perfect. In America, there's also a big emphasis on progress. Like, some of these method books have so many pieces and many of them are really short, and the idea is that the more you get through, the better it is for the child, because they get a sense of progression, they learn so many pieces. But in Europe, you learn far less pieces in the same amount of time. They will be more difficult, but you can't really progress onto the next one until you perfected the previous one. So more emphasis on quality, and in the United States, more emphasis on progress. And again, I'm just making very big generalizations here based on what was 40, 50 years ago in these method books. We didn't get to nowadays yet. And here comes the big thing. Because the world is getting so globalized, not just food that we eat, not just the clothes that we wear, not just the TV shows that we watch, music education is getting globalized as well. We are in the UK using American method books. Even in Europe, they are using now American method books. European method books have been used in America very many times, depending on where the teacher is from. So everything is kind of mixing and melting together into one, and that means that the truth is going to be somewhere in between the two. So although the discipline and the difficulty of the European history of piano education was not really for everybody, but too much fun from the American method books is not really what European students were looking for. So they kind of created now new method books which are in between the two, or teachers learned to use resources from both sides. So for example, when I teach, obviously I teach in the United Kingdom, and kids are very different here than they would be in a conservatory in Hungary, for example. When you try to teach them, you try to mix the two together. You try to go with a method book that gives them something fun, something that gives them a feeling of achievement, something that allows them to progress, but you also want to start adding in original repertoire and working on technique, even though the method books don't always include those pieces. When I was a child, I don't remember learning from method books at all. I think I might have had one very early book which we used for a month or two, but after that the first books that I started from was Czerny, and then Bach, easier pieces like gavottes, musettes and preludes, and then we went on to other original repertoire. That was 30 years ago, so quite a long time ago, but it already shows you how much things changed, because there were not so many method books available back then, and also it depends on the teacher that was teaching you. Now what I see is that in Europe, from the places that I have heard from and that I know of, they have a couple of method books, but they still supplement from the very young age with Bach is one of the first things that they do, and some Czerny and Kabalevsky maybe, and some of these easier original pieces. Now if we look a bit further east, in Asia, especially China, where piano has such a big tradition now. Piano obviously arrived a lot later there because it wasn't one of their traditional instruments. They took a lot from the European roots, but they put their own identity on it, which is basically discipline. We know that Asian schools have a lot more discipline. It's a lot less about fun. American Asian schools are kind of complete opposite. Again, this is probably now meeting somewhere in the middle, and I know there are lots of international schools in Asia as well, and Asian kids travel abroad, go back, and then they transfer the skills they learned abroad, and that's how they start teaching over there. So globalization is changing all of this, but the idea was that in the Asian school system, piano was very regimented, and it was all about technique and becoming very good, very quick, very fast, and there wasn't a lot of emphasis put onto fun pieces and having fun at the lessons. It was all about progress, it was all about perfection, and probably speed and dexterity went a little bit overboard and was more important than musical expression and identity and artistry. Again, this is things that I heard from people who trained there, and I had a lot of transfer students from China who moved to the United Kingdom, had a few years of piano lessons in China, and then I continued teaching them here in the UK. What I noticed was that, again, most of them were using a standard selection of books: Bayer, Hannen, Czerny, and Bach, and these are the main things that they start with, not Faber's Piano Adventures and similar books. So they get very strict, dry music right from the very start. So what I'm trying to get to by the end of this video is that the main difference in the styles of teaching comes from history and traditions within a certain country. Because of the world we live in now, where everything is mixing, I think this difference is a lot less pronounced now, and in many places you can't even see a difference depending on what school you are in or what kind of teacher you have. The further we go in time, the more these differences are going to disappear. The other thing that is having a huge effect on how piano is being taught and how piano is being played is the internet. Before the internet, you couldn't really learn piano unless you had a teacher. It's impossible to learn the piano just from books if you have no one to show you things. Now, if you don't have a teacher now, you've got so many resources, you've got thousands and millions of videos on YouTube, you've got online courses, you've got apps like Simply Piano or Flowkey, whatever they are, and most of these resources are going to be based around the fact that you have a little bit of time, you want to try something new, and let's have some fun. Simply Piano wasn't invented to teach you how to play a Bach fugue or to understand more about music theory or to understand about style or to be perfect when it comes to technique. It's about fun, it's about doing something new, like a New Year's resolution. So if you think about 200 years ago in Europe, when someone who started playing piano was very serious about it, and being a musician was not something that everybody could do. Nowadays, anyone can start playing the piano, and for that reason, you can't expect every single student to be as disciplined and serious about it like those who want it as a career. Music is very good for the soul, it's very good for the brain, it's very good for development in younger children. So I don't think that the strong, regimented system is for everybody and should be forced on all children. So there should be an element of fun, but when you see that someone is more inclined to do more and is enjoying it and is disciplined and has the patience to study more, then you can give a lot more material to those students. But just because someone is having fun, it doesn't mean that they shouldn't play piano. Just because they don't practice 2 hours every single day, it doesn't mean that they shouldn't play the piano. So I hope this video or discussion, thinking out loud as I said, is going to shed some light on why American method books are the way they are and why European method books are the way they are. And as I said, Europe is starting to use more and more American method books because they realize that children love them because they are more fun and you can supplement them with the old dry material. And I'm saying dry because a young 5-year-old is not going to really appreciate the beauty in Bach music, but they have to learn it because it is essential for these skills. If I left out something from this video, or if you don't agree with something in this video, then leave it in the comments. I'm open to discussions about it. As I said, this video was not strictly based on a survey or research, and I mentioned at the start of the video, everybody plays piano differently, everybody teaches piano differently, but based on the most popular books in a country, we can kind of see what the main tendencies are. It doesn't mean that you belong to that tendency, but a region in general can kind of follow certain patterns. Thank you very much for watching, and subscribe for more.